Hello and welcome to Coffee, Buses and Politics. Nice and early on this Friday morning. We're actually, let's be honest, we're recording this on Thursday night because we're all too lazy to get out of bed, which is why David's not here, because we chose to record it while he was having a council meeting, which is a good little scam. So before we start, can you just introduce yourself?
I thought David was still in bed.
Probably. He probably still is in bed. Before we start, can you just introduce yourselves and give us your pronouns, please?
Well, I'm Martin Curtis, and I think I'm he, him.
Hello, I'm Alex, she, her pronouns, but I don't actually have them in my email signature.
Okay. So the reason why I mention this is we haven't gone super woke this morning or this evening. It's because it's actually been announced as one of the top electoral policies of one of the mayoral candidates. So who's that? Tell us a bit about why we're talking about that, Martin, perhaps.
Well, Paul has said he's going to be start making some policy announcements, and I'm glad about that actually, because he needs to, because his campaign has been very, very negative so far, and his policies seem to be no more campaign days is one of them. But you know, with it, this is, and I think this is how him talking about how he's going to manage his office. But the other thing is, he said that he is going to stop staff from putting pronouns in their email addresses, which I think is a mistake for all sorts of reasons. The messages it sends to some people is unfortunate, is the way I would put it.
I'll do an extract from this post because I have lots of views on this topic. So it says, for example, Cambridge City Council promotes campaigns like Veganuary and World Vegetarian Day. Why should residents pay to be lectured about eating meat? Everyone should make their own choice. It's none of the council's business. So on this, I'm like, okay, I eat like all types of food, and I don't, celebrate, vegan day, vegetarian day, whatever. But I don't care if others do, and it's a personal choice, and it doesn't offend me if other people have a day when they maybe speak about, different types of diet and inform people about this. I mean, at the end of the day, it's my personal choice what I choose to eat and not to eat. But I'm not offended that the council might speak about this. What do you think, Stephen?
Well, but how much does it really cost as well? So I used to be chair of the county council, and part of that role was about 3 times a week dashing up and down to Alconbury to the CCC HQ and doing flag raising for different causes. And the real cost of that was my petrol, which I never claimed back, going to Alconbury and raising a flag and taking a photo. On a very rare occasion, there might have been a press release, but it's not something the council spend a lot of time and effort on. And actually, most of those flag raisings were for really important causes, I thought, things like, armed forces, the Ukrainian conflict we raised them for the white ribbon campaign against domestic violence. And so 9 times out of 10, it was just a way for those organizations to borrow some publicity from the council. And we didn't raise the flag for everyone. They were usually quite good and interesting causes. So I don't think it does any harm, and I don't think it's a major piece of what councils do. And it's you won't save any money by cutting it, is my point.
I mean, I broadly agree. The only thing I would say, there are, when you look at councils' Twitter feeds and stuff like that, which I do and I monitor them quite a lot, they are putting time, somebody's time and effort is going into posts about some of this stuff, although they tend to be links and stuff like that, so they're fairly quick to do. And actually, the Twitter feeds and, the Facebook pages and that sort of stuff, they already exist anyway. So they're not creating something new for it. So it is relatively light. I'm not overly upset with this, except to say I would be and I'd be absolutely up in arms about it if he suddenly started saying they wouldn't celebrate Armed Forces Day or White Ribbon Day and stuff like that. And, we need to have conversations about mental health more and more in the country. So that as well. Some of the other stuff, I really can't be excited about whether we do it or not. But I
think part of the issue with not allowing people to use pronouns in their email signature is that you're going to genuinely put some people off working for the combined authority, aren't you? That's the only thing that's going to change. Now, I'm not particularly. I don't usually list my pronouns, on places because I think it's perfectly obvious to most people how I identify. Me and Martin with our big beards. But even if anybody made a mistake and decided to call me she or her, it's not a big issue. Now, I get the reason for doing it is to allow other people to have the space to do it and make it part of the conversation. I don't think it's particularly important.
No, let's be blunt about it. The reason for doing it is because the Conservatives, a number of Conservatives on that wing of the party, are obsessed with this so-called sort of woke agenda, and that's what it's about. Is a reaction to that, and that's the issue for me. If an officer wants to put their pronouns in a signature block, who is it harming?
Well, no one. That's why, I'm not. I mean, it was part of a wider, kind of policy agenda of no 4-day week, no staff working entirely, almost entirely at home, no equality, diversity, and inclusion (EDI) officers, no pronouns in email signatures, and no campaign-based months, weeks, or days. Although Paul Bristol did say he doesn't refer to civic events or Armed Forces Day would be a civic type of event rather than a campaign day in that sense. But with the pronouns, I'm how many times I actually look at the email signature of someone. It really doesn't bother me if someone uses it or not, and I think people should be free to write what they want, really, in that sense. And I find it quite contradictory, the same people who are all for the freedom of expression, speech, and so on, being but you're not allowed to do that because it doesn't really fit with my agenda on those issues. I mean, I think we give too much time to those cultural issues, whereas we should focus on more important stuff.
There's a point I've made about the increase in the amount of public transport in Cambridgeshire in the past, which is if you're an employer, the thing you want is the biggest range of candidates you can get when you advertise for a job, right? And this is really important. So what happens if Paul advertises for, a senior transport manager, and somebody that identifies as, as they, them, as an example, looks at that policy, but also the complete lack of nobody in the authority doing this, he will lose out on potentially a good candidate. And the consequence of that is Cambridgeshire loses out. And that's a reality we have to think about as well.
I agree.
But the combined authority is going to be increasingly important, aren't they? With this local government reorganisation, is about investing power in the combined authority. And, in the last couple of years, you've already seen actually one of Nick's biggest successes is building a competent staff around him. When he inherited it, he had virtually nothing. And so actually HTC has lost a lot of our best officers and talented officers to the combined authority, because that's where all the action is going to be in the future. And because they pay better, I think, as well. But so that his success in that role depends on him being able to attract the best officers to help him, and it won't just be people who identify as trans who have different pronouns. It's going to be people who are sympathisers and allies, like most of us. Right. Look at this and think it's not a very nice place to work, perhaps. And but also, where I work, lots of people walking around with rainbow ribbons. It's almost the normal things, and that's previously would have been a big male engineering environment, and my company is proud to be part of that kind of tolerant agenda, and I don't see why local government shouldn't be the same.
Well, but also the combined authority is about attracting government money. Big role with the combined authority, because although it's devolution still at the government's behest, and the vast majority of it. And so if by some of this stuff you're starting to upset civil servants who are giving government advice, or even upsetting ministers, potentially, it shouldn't do, but it potentially will impact on the ability of the combined authority to bring in money as well. And all that for a policy that, if you allow it, I just repeat this, it does nobody any harm. It might upset a few people, but you can't go through life without upsetting people. And for something like this, allowing people, if they want to put pronouns in their signature block, if somebody's upset by that, then that's their problem.
Yeah, it's because they're threatened by reform, aren't they? That's the big. We predict this would happen, of course. It's very obvious that they're veering to the right because they're scared of reform. Who I understand are going to going to field a almost full slate of candidates, stealing their vote and perhaps splitting their vote, and destroying Paul Bristow's chances of being elected mayor. So not sure it's the right strategy, though.
Well, I've said this before about the Conservatives trying to be more reform than reform. All you're doing is waking up to the fact that there's very little difference between the Conservatives and reform. So why not go for the real thing? And it does the Conservatives no good at all. The best thing the Conservatives can do is put forward solid, sensible policies that show that the Conservatives are solid, sensible people, instead of just trying to be like reform. And that's seems to be how it is at a national level as well as a local level. It's a shame from my perspective, because there's so much potential in what the Conservatives have to offer in one way nationism, in terms of what people want from our country at the moment. But the Conservatives won't look at it.
Yeah. The other thing, it links with like what Stephen was saying about like what image you want to have as an employer as well, like for potentially attracting like the future talent, is saying like, well, no staff working almost entirely at home. I mean, I like the nuance in that, like almost entirely, but what it is something against the flexible working policy, where I really think like, we should avoid oversimplifying those arguments around, work from home, back in the office, or 4-day week, no 4-day week, because actually it does depend on the type of job, on the individual circumstances. I have like, some friends who have, disability, for example, and actually post-COVID working from home, it opened more job possibilities for them, because they could do jobs they couldn't do in the past, because they couldn't get to the workplace because of different disability, and they can actually work at least part-time now and not be out of work due to disability. So I think like it does include a range of groups who haven't been included in a similar way before, after various companies post-COVID reviewed their policies, and pretty much most companies have now flexible working policy, as well as local government organizations and NGOs as well. So I think we really have to think carefully about this, because if we just say, well, everyone should be in the office 9 to 5, well, depends what you do, like how far you are, if you actually need it in the office that day, and so on. So for me, those kind of things are just to, I guess.
Yeah, but also again, in terms of attracting the best people, it's not just about COVID and all this stuff. It's about, when I worked in London full time, I was working in London, and I was working in London 5 days a week. I was having to get to Oxford Street 5 days a week. And I enjoyed working in London, I have to say. But that journey, is quite draining, and it's really long days, when you're doing that. And there was a time in the middle of it when my boss, who for the most while I worked there was a great boss, he just said, I think this is too much, Martin. And after a couple of years, he just said, I want you to come into the office twice a week, work from home 3 days a week. And and it's that point about, if you've got somebody living a long way from the office, he's going to be more productive when he's not traveling, 1 hour and a half, 2 hours to get into the office every day of the week, when he's needed, and, but maybe 1 or 2 days a week, so he's seen in or whatever. That works.
Yeah, and we don't have, because of how, I guess, the economy is organized and where the main centers of employment are, we don't live in a country where most people work within a 5-minute walk, to their home and so on, like perhaps, in other societies it exists. So therefore, you have to factor in commute, and the fact that not everyone, people who are saying, well, just find something closer then. Well, in many parts of the country, you don't have the job availability close to you, and you have to consider the commute, obviously the cost of that as well. I work 2 days in London now. It costs £50 a day to get a ticket there and back, all those different factors, plus doing 2 hours door to door to your job, 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours commute a day, which I think you can research whether it impacts productivity, and of course how attractive the offer is for people to have to pay the transport as opposed to someone living close to the role, and how you're able to, I guess, attract talent from a wider area and not people immediately living closer.
The other thing about no 4-day week, and I sort of understand some of the concern about the 4-day week at South Cant, and I do sort of understand it. But does this mean that Paul doesn't want a second term? Because in 5 years' time, a lot more people around the country are going to be working 4-day weeks. because it's a growing trend. And in 10 years' time, my guess is virtually everybody will do.
Perhaps. I'm less against the working from home thing, because I think that's part of a trend in employment right now. So I've just started a new job and I'm expected to be in the office 3 days a week. Yeah, which, coming from a place where I've hardly been in the office 3 times in the last 5 years, it's a bit of an adjustment, but it is what's happening generally in employment. Yeah, and like you say, maybe we're moving towards a 4-day week, or maybe we aren't. But I completely take the point, is that you want to hire the best people, and the best people don't always live in Huntingdonshire, because that's where the combined authority is these days as well. So if it means that more great people are going to be attracted into Huntingdonshire, that's great. But it is, I think, unnecessarily restrictive. But it's an opinion thing.
So there's something a bit personal with this. My daughter works in London. Okay, she works. She's quite senior comms officer in a university in London. I'm not going to say which one, but she lives in Sheffield. And the office basically love what she does. They love her productivity. They love her effectiveness, and she's been promoted a few times on the basis of the arrangements she's got. And they are, and she has to go in when she has to, which is round about once every couple of weeks or so. But the fact that as an employer, they really like the fact that she delivers for them. That's what you want, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think it really depends on the type of job as well, because I had jobs in the past where, teamwork was really important. You had to work very closely with one or more colleagues, and you have to have this in-person contact to strategize together, to have in-person days and so on. But I now also had jobs where I literally commuted 2-3 hours, changing several tubes to sit in an office, do admin work or emails, just contribute to the congestion, buy all those takeaway coffee cups, pollute the environment, and then go home. And actually I would have done exactly the same at home with no change. It's going to the office, not maybe interact a bit in the lunch break, and then you think why am I here? I actually did change that job, but there are those jobs where it isn't actually not necessary unless you have a team meeting or a strategy day or a workshop type meeting, and it's not necessary to just go sit from one computer to another and just contribute to adding more cars on the road.
So there was a lot of criticism when New Shire Hall first opened, that it was going to be a graveyard and completely empty. I was in there for a committee meeting yesterday, and I struggled to park again because the large car park at CCC's headquarters is almost always full now. And I'm not sure if that's a policy where county council employees have to come in a certain amount of time. But I think it's also because their leader, Stephen Moyer, or the executive, the CEO, Stephen Moyer, is a kind of in the office guy, sits in an open plan office and comes in every single day, I think, or most days of the week, as in spite of everybody else. But because of that, county council is now thriving. So kind of that diminishes from the kind of South Cams 4-day week has made lots of people think that all councils work 4-day weeks at the moment, but actually it's just an exception. South Cams is the only one I know of, and most people are a lot more open and free and progressive. So we'll see how that works.
One of the things with the South Cams thing is part of the reason why people like working there is because the 4-day week is quite a unique thing, and it's very, very attractive. As the 4-day week starts to spread, that starts to fade, and then that's when you start to really examine the effectiveness of it. But within local authorities somewhere, this has got to start somewhere, because it's coming. You can see it in the private sector. You can see 4-day weeks growing and growing. And in fact, I remember, I think Theresa May had some staff that were on 4-day weeks in number 10.
So, and the reason why South Cams did it was because, like every other local authority, they struggled to recruit and retain planners. And now and they had some real planning problems in South Cams and City, where they've got combined planning service. And because of that, now, they don't have those problems anymore. And where would you rather go and work? HDC for 5 days or South Cams for 4 days and earn the same money? So, it comes back to recruiting and retaining the best people, doesn't it? And that's the reason why they did it.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Shall we move away from Paul Bristow's election campaign? And I'm sure we'll be.
Can I just finish by saying I am glad that Paul is starting to talk about what he stands for a little bit, rather than just slamming everything and campaigning for things that he can't deliver on because they're not his responsibility. I think it's really good, and I think people will start to see what the Conservative campaign's really about, I hope.
Well, one of my Conservative friends messaged me, who listens to the show or watches the show today, to tell me that I think, is it Sophie Corcoran, who's probably going to be the Reform candidate, who used to be a campaigner for Paul Bristow, has spoken in favour of the death penalty today, as if we were supposed to be shocked by that. But a Reform candidate being in favour of death penalty doesn't seem entirely surprising to me. I would have thought it would be one of their policies almost, but I need to check into that.
I haven't seen one or in what context it was, but yeah, want to check out later.
Yeah, one of the bits of advice I was given when I was standing for selection for parliamentary seats was never tell anybody that you're not in favour of the death penalty as a Conservative audience, because I'm not. Because you'll lose half the audience at least straight away. So he said, find a fudge, which is what I did.
Very good.
We've all done that on hustings, so not on that topic, but on other things.
And the Conservative Party moved to the right since then as well.
Let's move on to talk about hospitals then, Alex. There's some big news from the Labour government this week about hospitals. What's that news?
Yes, I was actually watching Parliament TV live on Monday this week, when Wes Streeting was giving his statement in the House of Commons, where he confirmed, amongst others, that the funding to rebuild Hinchinbrook Hospital is secured, and then the hospital is in the first stage, the so-called wave 1 of the hospital's program. So they're looking at the 25 till 2030 wave of hospital rebuilding, alongside I think 6 other hospitals which were the RAC affected hospitals part of the program. So yes, the estimated cost, just really interesting, to rebuild the affected parts of Hinchinbrook Hospital is between 500 million and 1 billion. So yeah, basically the funding was confirmed, and there were articles in the local news and so on. This is going ahead, and as well as positive responses from the MPs in Huntington Northwest camps and St. Neots and Mid camps as well, welcoming the news to different degrees, but in different wording. But I think they're all happy it's happening.
To be fair, it'd have been a bit of a shock if any of them said it wasn't welcome.
Yes, I said in different wording, but in a positive way, depending on the person. But I think it's a good thing. I think people have been waiting for it to be confirmed for a very long time. So it's good to have clarity in this. And I think that's something that I really didn't think it wouldn't happen. I was part of some of the consultations some months ago. I thought it was too advanced of a plan not to happen anyway, but it's good to have that confirmation of the funding, as well as the implications for the other hospitals. Of course, there are other hospital news, but what I actually liked in that statement on Monday is that it was very realistic, because I think it's very easy to say we'll build X many more hospitals and so on without really considering the cost or the time frames. So some people did criticize it, saying, well, the government should have done more, but I'd rather have something confirmed that's realistic, delivered, than promises that can't be funded.
So are they actually all new hospitals, or are some of them just new wings to hospitals? And
Conservatives called them new hospitals, didn't they? In their part of their campaign, they were building new hospitals.
That's why I made the point.
Well, they are significant upgrades, though. You don't £1 billion, 500 million to £1 billion, even in today's society, is still quite a lot of money. And I think, having seen the plans at Hinchinbrook, they're quite far-ranging as well. And I think we all welcome it. I think it was inevitable. I think currently there's a weight limit on going to the top floors, which for a heavier man like myself is a bit worrying when it comes down to the weight of individual people. But I think it's great for the hospital and great for residents of Huntingdonshire and the surrounding area. But it's also great for the economy as well, isn't it? Because they're going to employ a lot more people there as well, and that's fantastic for all of us. And so it will be great in Huntingdon and those places. More decent employees, more money for the economy, and I think it's a win-win all round. So exciting.
Will there be some sort of local accountability for it? Because obviously one of the things is just making sure that all the nuances of Huntingdon are built into a new site. As an example, I think is going to be important. But also there needs to be some sort of that you could argue there needs to be. I'm a bit divided on it. Some sort of public sector oversight of the budget and stuff like that locally as well. Because I mean, when you're talking about between 500 million and a billion, it's a big spread.
Yeah.
And you just need to make sure that Hingenbrook delivers as the hospital that it deserves to be and needs to be. Without a huge amount of government waste, because if I was a contractor looking at a spread of 500 million to a billion, I know which way I'd want to head it.
Definitely, there's something. I mean, it links to I guess the next topic, which was the adults and health committee today and the budget. But one part of the health scrutiny, we have a tracker of different obviously topics for scrutiny and recommendations. One of the things that was on the tracker agenda was to provide an update on Hingenbrook. So I did actually suggest after the committee, because I think it's good timing now that this has been announced. I'm also interested exactly in the same questions as to what extent the county council will have any influence or involvement in this, and especially around the issues with access, traffic and roads, and potentially we're having to build a new access road, because at the moment Hingenbrook is completely congested and is not really sustainable in the long term.
So I think that's a good thing, and I think the scrutiny committee, actually a good scrutiny committee, is probably the right place for that, because although the scrutiny committees don't have a lot of power on something like this, they potentially got a voice, and I think that's quite important, because that helps hold them to account. That's good.
On the accountability thing, so what we've had been having lots of chats, both formally and informally with political colleagues about how we're going to split up local authorities to form these new unitaries. And somebody asked, you have to do lots of looking at maps and comparing where other boundaries lie. And somebody suggested using the NHS kind of hospital trust boundaries as a suggestion. But those are a bigger mess than local government boundaries, aren't they? So it would be good if everything lined up, wouldn't it? Because
can I make a point to link these two though, and to link these two issues? And it is important because we're going through this process of creating 1, 2 or 3 unitaries in Cambridgeshire, and that is going to mean, whichever way it goes, changes to the way and reorganising the way we deliver social care, and that reorganisation is going to take money. We also know that when a government is brave enough, they are going to take on adult social care away from local authorities and create a national care service. I'm not entirely convinced by that, but I think that's the way it's going to go. So why not do it now? Why not just, if you're going to do it, have one transition from local authorities into a national care service, instead of from local authorities into a new local authority and then into a national care service? It just makes sense. And I'm a bit, one of the things I think the government got wrong was putting off the review of social care until 2028. I think it's a mistake.
I think it probably comes down to civil service capacity, doesn't it? As well, that's heard from the chief exec of Cambridgeshire County Council, that there's a shortage of capacity in local government and central government to deliver these, and the Boundary Commission to deliver these LGR reviews. One of the things that's going to influence is people are saying that the government's going to prefer very simple solutions, i.e. existing districts merging together rather than being split or changing boundaries, because nobody has the capacity. So putting on another massive reform on top of that, you could build it all into the same thing, I guess. But I guess it's going to be a big job.
But by the time 2028 comes, Stephen, I sound like I'm telling you off there. Sorry. By the time 2028 comes, we are going to have social care costing that bit more, as an example, because we know there's a growth in the number of in social care numbers. So what all we're doing is we're guaranteeing extra cost and extra revenue anyway. So why not dump some revenue in now that's going to save some money by 2028?
It's a good suggestion. So, Alex, on that topic, what did you learn from, I guess it was almost pre-budget setting at your committee meeting this week? Was it adults and, what's it called? Adults and health?
Adults and health. Well, I've done, well, we had children's, then we had, well, the previous weeks, then we had the communities one that I'm vice chair of. And today I substituted for a colleague on adults and health. So I've done this as well. More council paper reading than for me. I think it was really interesting because I think everyone basically agreed that long term or even short term, it is a very unsustainable situation. One of the figures that really stuck with me, like reading the papers, is between 2020 and 2024. So the cost of providing services for older people and those with physical disabilities increased by 64%. That's in 4 years, right? 2020 to 2024. And then the population that most needs the services, so if you're looking at the over 70s population, but even like over like 60s, it increased by a third in the last decade and is obviously projected to increase even more. So if you think about, whoever says, well, government, we welcome the additional social care grant, but the government should give more funding. There's not, you have to give like a significantly huge amount of funding to be able to cope with those pressures long term. So I do agree with Martin's comments. This needs to be reformed. Like there's no way in which you can sort. Every year we'll end up with this budget where we're basically trying to find savings, trying to provide, obviously fulfill your statutory duties, and say government should give more grant money to local authorities without sorting out the underlying issues. So
social care as an issue has been ducked by governments, national governments, since at least Tony Blair's time.
Yeah.
That's a truth. I suspect before that as well. And, all they do is occasionally they throw a bit more money into it and they kick it into the long grass as a result of that. But then that it's going to come back and they're going to plead for more money. And that's exactly what Boris Johnson did. He said, I'm going to save social care. All he did was throw some short-term money in. I'm not sure all of it made its way in either. And just guaranteed that, the ever-increasing sort of burden on councils is going to continue for however many years.
Yeah, I think there were some good points raised in committee today. I raised the point about actually what you mentioned before, Martin, the case review with the first phase reporting 26 and obviously the 2028, which has been obviously criticized of being like too late for the conclusions of the review. So I did ask like to what extent the county council will be or has been involved in this. So it was like they are in conversation with government, but it was really interesting to see that there's no detail yet in terms of like how the county council actually fits into that. So it was good to put that on the agenda. And actually the opposition spokesperson, Councillor Bowden, did raise this whole issue around the local government reform and how this impacts our thinking, especially, when you scrutinize the budget and see so many like very long-term contracts and how this reorganization will impact the contracts and so on.
So one of my concerns is that if we create two unitaries in Cambridgeshire, which I think is the likely solution, I know that's not everybody's solution, but if we create two unitaries in Cambridgeshire, that they'll do, effectively, you've got to create, you've got to create two sets of management overseeing adult social care, and that will cost more. And one of the things that has happened in other places that have unitarized is they've created trusts to manage across sort of the whole county, and my problem with that, you could argue that two unitaries, we've got two lots of social care now. Actually, that's a good point. But the trust thing, they settle down eventually, but they're quite chaotic at the start, and it causes problems with the management of social care, and that's important too.
Yeah, I think there are also. Sorry, go on, Stephen.
You carry on.
No, on this as well, like on the committee, I think there was also interesting conversation around, what savings can we make? Well, not only in general, but for example, like on social care apprenticeships, is something that I raised because there's like a very comparatively small saving they're expecting in 2 years time, because now they're investing into more social work apprenticeships. So I asked the question, is this ambitious enough, because you can argue that you can do like a lot more, on apprenticeships, on like, training people in-house, especially reading some of the reporting around the impact of the previous immigration rules around social care work visas. And there was a report out by Care England recently showing how significantly that impacted and reduced international recruitment, which of course was the intention of the government, to reduce the net migration numbers, but ultimately it exacerbated some of the issues in social care. So it's either you're like going to amend some of those international recruitment rules, immigration rules, or you're going to invest really more significantly into training people locally and doing apprenticeships and the routes into like vocational education and things like this, because otherwise the recruitment issue, every single committee, there's like a paper, at least there's a debate on like the issues around recruitment in social care, and it's not going to go away.
Yeah, it's interesting. A few years ago, when Steve Barclay was the, I think he was in charge of health and social care, I sent him an email which basically said, look, if you're going to do, why not go back to, do you remember the old days when you used to have SENs and SRNs? And I think the SRNs were the ones that went through universities and whatever, and the SENs were sort of on the job training type stuff. Why not do something that starts with somebody being a paid carer, but gives them a career path that takes them into nursing? And so you think about, the crossover there is between social care and medical care, and the issues there that there are at the moment, where, a social worker is only able to do certain things and they don't involve medical care. They need another carer to do that, as an example. So if you can create something that creates a career for people, you'll help yourself with your retention of staff, you'll help recruitment, and you start to you deal with recruitment issues. I suspect it'd be cheaper than putting every nurse through university as well. I think there are nursing apprenticeships now, but even so, it sort of makes sense to me in solving a lot of issues.
Yeah,
Steve Barclay sort of shunned it by saying we already have nursing apprenticeships, I think, but that wasn't quite the point I was making.
I think that the problem with local government, so I had a meeting in St Ives today with the Environment Agency to talk about St Ives flooding problems, which are down to the fact that the Environment Agency is funded by protecting people's houses from flooding, yeah? And if they don't do that, they can't fund things. And that's what's also accepted. They admit what's causing the problem is they don't spend money on maintenance, and so therefore we end up costing us more money downstream. And somebody asked us, well, why doesn't government have this longer term view where you invest in, in keeping these things maintained so it doesn't cost so much in the long term? And the problem is we don't have the money, do we? And every single year we're making cuts, and trying to get through a 4-year term is difficult enough. Nobody really has that 10-year view in the future, which is one of the unfortunate consequences of democracy, in which we keep flip-flopping administrations, I guess.
Interesting that so I'm going to sound like a proper socialist now, but here you go. I've been reading Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham's book Head North, and the book's in 2 parts. One sort of tells their story of their journey into Westminster and out to become mayors, but the second half talks about the sort of reform they'd like to see in the public sector. And one of the things that they make a case for is that if you move towards PR, at least in one way, you would have some continuity. So when you have an election, 7 or 8 times out of 10, one of the parties that is the major party, a party in part of a coalition, is going to continue in government, and that gives you an ability to have a bit more and do a bit more long-term thinking in government, which is the thing we absolutely need, because that's what this is me not sounding like a socialist, but if you go back in history, this is the thing that made Britain great, was the fact that in terms of infrastructure and stuff like that, we were able to think ahead and deal with problems before they were problems. And part of that is about long-term thinking. And our whole political system has lost that.
Well, I think this local government reform is also going to have some unintentional consequences now, because now lots of us, are elected to authorities where, the whole thing about the way the democracy works is that you do the right thing because basically you want to get re-elected. Yeah. But now we're in a situation where the authorities that we're elected to are going to go away in the near future. There's going to be far fewer councillors in unitaries, which means lots of the existing councillors either won't try to be re-elected or won't be re-elected because there's going to be less of us. And so, it's some of that, in Huntingdonshire, the green bins thing was a massive decision for us. I think it was the right decision, but everybody's worried, thinking, well, we're not going to get re-elected again. But actually, it's probably quite likely the HDC is never going to see another election. There might be an election in next year, but there probably won't be. And so that whole thing, goes away, and the whole accountability thing. Hopefully,
well, yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, I don't think it would have been a problem anyway. It's the truth. I think charging for green bins or whatever, or the bin
general
charging,
principle though is the decisions we make now. I don't really, when we sit for county council in a couple of weeks' time to talk about the budget, and the Conservatives are throwing their toys out of the pram. Yeah, what's the point? Because actually, you're not going to get the next election is not going to be fought on these terms. Maybe a county it will be because you're going to have elections in a few months' time. But that's because a short term anyway. Because
politicians are more obsessed with power than they are about the people they serve. That's a reality, and that's what's interesting about that is I'd say most politicians, because it's certainly not true of all of them, but that's true at a local level where they don't do that obsession with power as well as they do at a national level. But that's what politics is about. And, that. So even if they're in power for 2 years, they're in power for 2 years.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that'll also, especially at Huntingdonshire, where we might not face election again. Yeah, it'll help us to take some bolder, bad decisions without fear of repercussions. So we'll see. All right, I think we've got to go now, don't we? I think, Alex, you've got a meeting at 7:30, so I think we're going to have to call it.
Fortunately or unfortunately, there's a late evening meeting from 7:30 until whenever it ends. Yes, if you're seeing this on Friday, it's been recorded on Thursday, and it's a Thursday evening meeting. It's not because, like Stephen said, because we're lazy and we can't wake up. It's because most of us can't actually make it tomorrow.
It's quite nice doing this when I'm not half asleep as well, although it's getting close to my bedtime anyway. So
I'm going back to bed after this, by the way. But can we talk about Station Road Rec next week then?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
And also, I think there's some interesting consequences of planning reform, which is going to have some really, really very interesting repercussions, I think. So we'll talk about those next week. So until then, have a lovely week, have a lovely Friday, and see you next week.
See you next week.
Cheers all.